Okay, so we're going to start animating these Daleks. It's a good idea before you start doing any animation, so you've got a base model that you can always use as the beginning of an animation to actually save out a second copy of your work. So I'll just go save as. I've actually already done this, so I'll just add the word animation there to the end. So I've got a copy of my file purely for practicing my animation work with. Okay, so there's quite a lot to cover here. One thing we'll look at first, if I go into a side view, to select multiple objects, as you know, you can right click and hold down shift and click around like this. We've got quite a lot of objects here that we're going to have to select at various times. Another method is to hit the B key. Gives you a box or a border select, and then I can drag a box and you can see that it goes ahead and selects whatever I drag across. This works in edit mode as well, so I can press B, drag a box, it grabs those vertices. Now when I do this, it's selecting an object I don't want, which is this sun lamp here that I've just put up for rendering later on. So what I can do to avoid objects that I don't want to select is to grab it like this, so it's easier to find in my outliner up in the corner here. You can see that sun lamp's been highlighted, and I can just tick this arrow off, which stops that object from being selectable. So I just thought I'd show you that. Okay, so I'm thinking we'll animate this arm just sort of moving around, rotating around. We'll animate this little thing spinning on its axis, spinning around. We'll animate the head, all of this section, sort of looking left and right, and then finally we'll move the whole Dalek around the scene. So there's quite a few things that need to happen before we can start on that. Firstly, if I select this arm here, okay, so I want this to sort of move around, and you think, okay, the logical thing is to rotate it and then record that rotation for part of your animation. But if I go and hit R right now for rotate, it's disconnecting straight away from the object itself. Now I could then go and grab it and try and put it back in place before I start animating, but it's going to cause us a lot more work. So what is this object rotating around? Now by default it rotates around what they call the origin point, which you've seen before, this little orange dot that every object has. All these objects have the origin point in the same place. Here we go, so I've selected this base of the Dalek and the origin point is sitting there. And generally what happens after you do a lot of modelling is the various components of your model end up with origin points in unusual places. So this object, you'd think the origin point should logically be sitting somewhere near the object, but it's not, sitting right up here. And when I rotate, by default, it's rotating, you can see this dotted line, it's rotating from the origin point there. We can also, you should be aware, down here, select different things we can rotate around. For instance, the 3D cursor. If I set my 3D cursor about here, just for argument's sake, and then change my rotation pivot point to 3D cursor, now when I rotate you can see it's the origin point is flying through the air, and the object itself is rotating around the 3D cursor. But for animation, rotating around our origin point is what we want to do, but we've got to sit it where we need it. I'm going to go into Z viewing mode, pressing Z key, zoom up close, and position my 3D cursor in the middle of this arm so that when it rotates around its origin point it's going to rotate from this section. Now if you think, right at the moment it's highly unlikely that that 3D cursor is exactly where I want it. I'm in a right side view and I can see it's in the center on my right view. Let's check the front view. It's close, but it's not quite there. So remember to always check 2 different views when you're doing this sort of stuff to get it just where you need it. A little bit of leeway generally you get away with, but it's got to be quite close. Okay, so I've got my 3D cursor in the center of this base pivot point. Going to select my object. Make sure you're in edit mode, object mode when you do this. And then I'm going to go object, transform, and then origin to 3D cursor will move the object's origin, that orange dot, to where my 3D cursor is. So now when I go and rotate this, you can see it's rotating off that point, which is what I want. Okay, with this object we have a similar thing to do, because the origin point's somewhere unusual. Oops, set this back to the new point. So it's off somewhere else when we go to rotate it. We're not going to rotate it, we're going to spin it, but we're going to run into similar issues most likely. So do the same thing again. We'll just zoom in close. That's pretty well in the center there by the looks, and then in my front view. Okay, in objects mode we go objects, transform, origin to 3D cursor, and it's rotating around the point that we want. Okay, there's a couple of other issues with that. I'll talk about it later as far as when we're going to spin this, but we'll get to that. Alright, so this one's ready to go, this one's ready to go. We want to move the head around. Now, there's ways we can animate this entire head without joining all these separate objects into one, but for this first exercise, well, for this part of the exercise, we're actually going to join these objects. I think I'll show you both methods because they've both got advantages and disadvantages. I'm just doing a B border select to select all of the head, and then I'm going to go Control J to join the objects, Control J, and my origin point will be fine where it is for this rotation. If I tell it to rotate along the Z axis, you can see the head of the Dalek moves quite fine. Alright, so the head's ready to go, the arm's ready to go. We might actually start by putting in some basic animation. As I said before, we're going to move the whole Dalek as well, so we've got a bit of work to do down here with all these separate pieces, but we'll get to that. Alright, so animation. If you haven't really looked at it much before, we define keyframes. So down here I've got the frames of my animation listed. At the moment it goes up to 300 frames. And we define keyframes, so we say at frame 1 we want the head to be sitting here, and then we jump up to frame 100, move the head, and so this is where we want it at frame 100, and then the computer will fill in those gaps. So mechanical type operations, animation that we're doing where we're moving mechanical things like a Dalek, it's a very easy process. When you do organic animation it's a little bit more complicated. We'll get to that. Okay, so frame 0, I'm going to drag this down to frame 0, come up here, insert a keyframe by pressing I. Okay, whoops. So Blender's saying, what do you want to record for the keyframe? The location of the object, the rotation of the object, the scaling, the location and the rotation, the location and the scale, etc. A few others we'll talk about later. Now, I don't want to record the location of this object because later on when I start moving the Dalek around, if I've recorded, if I've told Blender at frame 0 this is its location, it's going to fix at that point. Theoretically, it can cause us problems. So really the only thing I want to be recording is the rotation. Okay, for frame 0 we've locked the rotation in. I'm going to go up to frame 100 now. Rotate this around the Z axis, press my I key again, record the location again, And now I can drag my mouse down in my timeline and see what we call scrubbing the animation, see how it moves, or I can hit the play button and watch the animation. You can probably see by default Blender applies a bit of an ease to the animation in that the head starts out slowly and just gets a bit faster as it turns. It's subtle, but it's definitely there, and it just makes it a little bit more natural to watch. Okay, so that's that one moving. We'll do the arm, just do a basic movement on the arm. Okay, so frame 0, record the rotation. Frame 40. Now, if you just hit R once, so I've hit R to rotate, depending on what view you're in, Blender will pick an axis to rotate around. So you can see I've only got a certain amount of control with where I put this arm. When it comes to animation though, it's nice to have a bit more freedom to move this object just in the view that you're looking. If you hit R twice, so R and then R again, you can see now I've got a lot more control. I can sort of position it wherever I want. So I'm just going to put it down there, insert rotation keyframe. We'll make the whole animation 100 frames long. So now I'm back up to frame 100, hit R twice again, we'll just move back up there, insert rotation keyframe. Okay, let's play that. Okay, pretty simple. So this arm has 2 keyframes, so it moves down to that point, then up to that point. Whereas the head only has 2 keyframes, one at that point and then one at that point. Alright, so this one is a little bit more tricky. What we want to do is have this object spinning around, so these blade things are sort of spinning. I don't know if that's what a Dalek actually does, but I think it'll look good. So we want to record the rotation again, but when I go to rotate this object, even though my origin's in the right place, this isn't what I want. And no matter which axis I choose, so rotate around X, no, that's not it. Rotate around Y, that's not it. Rotate around Z, that's not it. So the problem here, if I look at top view, and I've intentionally skewed this off to the side, is that the object no longer follows my axis. So whereas this object directly flows along the y-axis, which makes it easy to model, this object I've rotated around, it's no longer flowing along the y-axis, so we can't rotate around our y-axis to get a smooth rotation. However, Blender has a global axis, which we have been using up to this point, but objects also have a local X, Y and Z axis. So if I hit R to rotate and then hit Y twice, now I'm rotating around the object's local y-axis, its own y-axis, which is giving me the effect I want, the spinning blades here. Incidentally, if you look at this base of the object, you can see it wobbles around a bit because my origin point wasn't quite in the center. It's not really a problem. If I had an issue with it, I could go and reposition my origin point more accurately, but it's going to be fine for our animation. Alright, so this one we're going to go to frame 0, insert a keyframe I, lock the rotation, and we'll do this one maybe a little bit faster, so I'll go to frame 10. I'm going to hit R, Y, Y to rotate around Y, and the other thing I'm going to do, if you look down in the corner, probably, sorry my face is probably in the way, it tells you in the corner how much rotation you're taking, and you can go negative degrees or positive degrees. So I'm going to rotate negative degrees up to, actually no, we won't worry about that, but be aware that you can rotate around a particular amount. So if you know I want to go 90 degrees around, it's quite possible to do, but we'll keep it simple for now. So frame 10, rotate it around. Set a keyframe for rotation, we'll go to frame 20. It's not going to spin very evenly, but that's fine. Rotation. And you can see as I create these keyframes, these yellow lines appearing, giving me a visual cue of where my keyframes are. That gets handy later on if you need to move them or delete them. Rotation. Okay. Oh, that'll do. It's only going to rotate for the first 60 frames, but that's fine. 50 frames. Let's play that back and have a look. Ooh, we've got a problem. Why are we doing this? Yes, I do know what's causing it, but that's probably going to be a little bit too much to cover at this point. So we've got a little bit of a wiggle in the object as it moves around. It's actually to do with the easing that I talked about before. So sorry about that, but we'll just have to keep going for now. You'll probably find the same thing on your models. We can stop that from happening. We'll save that for another tutorial though, I think. Okay. Final thing is to move the whole TARDIS around, have it sliding along the ground or whatever. Now, the first thing you think is I could just select the whole object and go inserting keyframes like this, and that will work. I can say record a location and rotation keyframe, but what it's going to do is insert keyframes for every single object in my model, which is a pretty messy way to animate. Really what we want to be able to do is to have one object that we move around and have the TARDIS follow. So this is what we call parent-child relationships, and I think I'll stop the video now. You can maybe have a go at doing some of these little motions on your TARDIS, and when you're ready, come back and we'll look at these parent-child relationships.